Squeeze tape resistant spot welding has been around for ages at the vehicle manufacturing level, but it's only been the last 20-ish years that vehicle manufacturers have really started to accept it for collision repairs. Some of the older machines, like I said, 20 years ago, didn't have adequate amperage for the metals that were being put together. At the same time, a lot of the squeeze pressure wasn't there as well. You remember a lot of handheld spot welders that were out there just didn't have the adequate squeeze force that was required to make collision repair welds. However, now today, squeeze type resistant spot welding has essentially become an essential part of the collision repair process. In September of 2018, Mark and Kristen and Larry did a program on squeeze type resistant spot welding. I'm not going to get a lot into detail on what they covered. I don't want to be redundant there. They talked about what a spot weld is, how a spot weld was made, how resistant spot welds were made, some of the different types of machines that were out there that were available. I also talked about some of the techniques that are used, shunting in particular, and how to use a shunt clamp for making the first welds. And they also touched on tip maintenance. Tip maintenance is an important piece that I want to expand on a little bit more today as we talk about spot welding. As spot welds are made, we start to get some buildup of material in there, and quite often what happens is the tips of the spot welding machine, or the spot welding tips, will actually kind of mushroom on that. What happens when it mushrooms like that is that more current, more amperage is required to make an effective spot weld. I refer to the Resistance Welding Manufacturers Association, and I just want to read a quote that they've got in one of their publications. It says, "The size and shape of the face of the electrode is related to the current density. It is current density that must be maintained constant in order to make welds of consistent quality. Electrode wear contributes dramatically to current density, dramatically. As an increase in electrode diameter of about 25% can reduce the current density by about 40%. Even though the control is maintaining the current constant, the weld nugget strength and size will be reduced." The Resistance Welding Manufacturers Association goes on to say, even though the current remains constant, the current density reduces, reducing the weld quality. So as the tips of the spot welder mushroom, more power is required to make the same type of weld. And our RWMA has an illustration to show that. You can see here we've got a 1/4-inch diameter spot welding tip, kind of very similar to what we've got here, what we might find in a collision repair setting. And that gives us 100% of the measured current area per unit. At 12,000 amps, that current density is about 245,000 amps per square inch. Now, as that begins to mushroom, we start getting to 5/16 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch, which is, we probably would never get to a 1/2 inch with a collision repair spot welder, hopefully. Anyways, you can see that dramatically that amperage density goes down. As that amperage density goes down, more amperage is required to make the same quality of weld. So if you have that mushroomed head on it and we're not increasing the amperage, we're going to have a weaker weld. There's just absolutely no way around that. So very important to stress about the tip maintenance, making sure that if you've got a cap such as this, that they're being replaced when they start getting, whether that be some material on the tip itself, or if it gets that mushroom effect. Very important to make sure that we're maintaining our spot welding tips, because even if we've got the proper squeeze pressure, if we've got the proper amperage, we will not get the same type of weld as that head continues to mushroom. So very, very important to make sure that we're doing that. As I mentioned, a spot weld has really become an essential tool for collision repairs. If we're not doing spot welding on today's vehicles with all the high and ultra high strength steels that are found on today's vehicles, we simply aren't repairing the vehicle properly. If we're using conventional plug welds on an ultra high strength steel part, we are damaging that steel, and we may be causing, we may be compromising the structural integrity of the vehicle, the crash worthiness of that vehicle. So using a squeeze type resistant spot welder is absolutely an essential tool. And you may need to make sure, as they covered in the show in September of 2018, that the facility's got the adequate power to make sure that the machine works, because the best machine in the world won't perform as designed if you don't have the proper power at your facility. So again, it's very important to make sure you get the adequate power, but spot welding is absolutely a required tool. Now, we talk about a lot of OEMs and what they require. And we're going to talk about a couple of different requirements from the vehicle manufacturers themselves. First, there are network requirements. So if you're part of a collision repair network, they may have specific specifications on the type of machine. They may have specific brands called out. We'll take a look at that momentarily. But also in the service information, you're going to see General statements about squeeze type resistant spot welding. You're going to see information about spot welding in the repair procedures themselves. So it's very critical that we're following the vehicle maker recommendations. They are, I said recommendations, but really they're service specifications. The proper way to repair the vehicle is by following those vehicle maker procedures, by following those vehicle maker service specifications, and making sure that we're not compromising, again, the integrity or compromising the quality of the welds, compromising the integrity of the vehicle, its crashworthiness. And we're going to talk a little bit about what meets OEM requirements. It's a term that you hear quite often, and we're going to dive into that a little bit as well and kind of really digest that, see what that really means and what it doesn't mean. So the first type of requirement, again, is a network requirement. Now, there are two types of network requirements typically. It may be specification based. It may say you need X pounds of force at the tips with, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 amps of amperage going through those tips, or it may be equipment specific. Now, when it comes to the specification based, as we continue to see more high and ultra high strength steels being employed in multiple layers and thicknesses, that amperage requirement quite possibly will go up in the future, maybe 14,000 amps or more. And then there's equipment specific recommendations. So some vehicle manufacturers call out an exact piece of equipment, make and model, because they've tested that equipment. They're comfortable with the power and the performance of that equipment. So you see typically two different types of requirements. So let's take a look a little bit at once. So we're going to go into Assure Performance right now. They maintain several different vehicle manufacturer networks. And if we look at the Fiat Chrysler collision repair network, for example, we've got some information kind of what is in the Fiat Chrysler program. And then as we scroll down a little bit more, you will see that they do have some required tools and equipment. So for the steel ferrous material technical repair capability, which is required for this network, the facility must have a 220 volt, 3-phase inverter type or functionally equivalent hybrid squeeze type resistant spot welder capable of 600 pounds of clamping force and 10,000 amps of current at the electrodes. So that's one particular way that one vehicle or Fiat Chrysler is requiring, again, that specification-based requirement, and several other vehicle manufacturers are as well. But that's one area you can look if you're interested in joining a collision repair network, researching who administers that network, and finding out what those specific requirements are. Let's take a look at another example now. So if we look at Honda, now we're going to dive a little bit deeper here into the Honda Pro First program and talk about some of the equipment that they require. So if I look at their required tools and equipment here, we will again see as we scroll down that they require a spot welder with over 9,000 amps with a clamping force of 350 kilograms or 772 pounds at the tips, and it must be capable of manual settings. Again, that's something that Larry touched on in the September 2018 episode as well about that manual settings, and we're going to show you a little bit why specifically around Honda here in just a bit. So it's not, although some of the equipment out there has settings, the automatic settings, you may be required to adjust that amperage, adjust some different settings on it. So Honda's one vehicle manufacturer that absolutely requires it. Now, if I take another look at one of the Honda programs that they've got available, Honda has a equipment catalog. They have a program they've put together. Now, this equipment isn't necessarily, the brands aren't required for the network necessarily. However, if you use one of the brands that are found in the equipment catalog, you know that Honda has gone, they've done the testing, they've done the research, and they're comfortable that that equipment, they're confident that that equipment will work as designed on their vehicles. The program information about the equipment catalog they got is to provide customers with a simple and effective program that offers the ability to purchase best-in-class tools and equipment at the lowest possible price. So if I look at the equipment catalog itself, and I scroll down to collision repair and click on welders and accessories, you will see equipment that Honda has researched and put together the information on the types of equipment that they know will perform on their vehicles for safe repairs. So you can see here you've got equipment from Chief, we've got some Carliner equipment, some Pro Spot equipment. So again, this is a really good way to, as you're looking to purchase a spot welder, if you haven't done so, if you're looking to upgrade your spot welding equipment and you work on a lot of Honda vehicles, this is a great resource to turn to see exactly what Honda has and what they've made available to the collision repair industry. Now, if we look at Audi themselves, now Audi is a vehicle manufacturer that actually that calls out specific equipment for their network. So if I go into the Audi program here, and again scroll down to the required tools and equipment, we will see that Audi requires, here's our tools and equipment. The facility must maintain an inventory of general workshop equipment, and it goes on to say the facility must have at least one of the 4 approved inverter welders, meeting Audi AG hardware and software specifications. And you can see we've got a wheel liner Schill, an electron machine, Techna, and car liner CRT 12,000 welder. So again, if you're an organization that is interested in the Audi network or looking to do some more work on Audi vehicles, these are required equipment for that. So very brand and model specific, not specification based. So very important to maintain that to make sure that you've got those proper machines when welding on Audi vehicles. Okay, so let's take a little bit deeper dive into a Honda case study. So this illustration here, this graphic was shown again in the September 2018 program. And Larry touched on a little bit where it says if we're looking at 1180 or 1500 MPa ultra high strength steel, auto set for spot welding is not acceptable. Manual settings are required to weld those types of steels. And we start talking about 1500 MPa steel from Honda. They're using that in everything. They're using it in the Bpillars, and the rocker panels, and the A-pillar, in the upper roof rail. The Honda Civic has some 1500 MPa steel in the rear rail. So if you're working on any Honda vehicle that's 2016, 2017, 18, 19, or newer, you will be dealing with 1500 MPa steel. You cannot use conventional plug welding for that type of steel. You have to use squeeze type resistant spot welding. That is the service specifications for it. Honda is very clear about that in all their publications, their body repair news articles that they put out for each new model, as well as the specifications, the repair procedures themselves. So where do I find this type of information? Where would I look for these different settings that are available? If I go to the Honda techinfo.honda.com website and I log in there, we already kind of looked at the tools and equipment part of it. So we're gonna jump back into that website. I want to show you a couple of different things here that Honda requires. So there's a lot of free information from Honda, and we're gonna cover the Honda website in depth in another show. But one thing that they do have, if I go in here, and you don't have to log in for all this information. We have an account with Honda, but there are a lot of collision repair information and industry position statements that are published on the Honda website that you don't need to log into. So if I go to the Honda Body Repair Manual Welding and Sectioning Guidelines Revisions, there's a lot of good information here that I can print out, I can document, I can share it with my staff, and make sure that we've got this information at our fingertips in case we need it. So if I look at the approved welding methods, again, conventional plug welding, open butt joint welding, they allow a lot of that on most of their steels. However, when we get to that 1500 MPa steel, you see that an open butt joint, we cannot use that conventional steel GMA MIG welding on that. And plug welding is approved, but only if it's called out in the body repair manual. And I'm not sure exactly how many instances there are of that. The bulk of the 1500 MPa steel, the procedures call for spot welding or MIG brazing where those arms can't reach. And again, we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into Honda on another program. But as I scroll down here, one thing I do want to point out is weld through primer. We get a lot of questions on weld through primer. Who recommends weld through primer, or who requires weld through primer, who doesn't? And Honda is very specific. When doing squeeze type resistant spot welding, apply a zinc rich weld through primer to bare remaining surface areas being welded and wipe off any excess. Use approved respirator protection, which is very important as well when doing any work on here. But again, Honda is very specific. They want you to use weld through primer on these squeeze type resistant spot welding. If I scroll down a little bit more, I want to point out another feature on here that they've got. Here's our 1500 MPa steel. Again, they want that entire, those areas removed completely. So bare steel, not just having that coating still on there, the aluminum oxide or E-coat still on there. They want everything removed from there. And now they've got what they call weld conditions for 1500 MPa steel. And you can see there's a number of different weld conditions, 16 of them to be exact. And so you'll see everything from 6,500 amps required all the way up to 9,000 amps required. You'll see that they've got different times for different weld requirements, different electrode force tips from 250 kilograms to 350 kilograms. I'm sorry, 31 weld conditions, not 16, my bad. So 31 different weld conditions, all the way up to 9,000 amps for that, and 350 kilograms of force at the tips. Now, where you find this, we'll dive into that a little bit deeper here momentarily, but this is in each procedure. They're gonna give you a chart, and they're gonna call specific welds and exactly where they want you to use these different weld settings. So if I go back to my, I pulled up the Honda Bpillar replacement procedure, and or the rocker panel replacement procedure, and you can see on here they have 5 different welding conditions for this particular part. In the front of the rocker panel here, towards the A pillar, weld condition number 15 requires 9,000 amps for 600 milliseconds. The next 8 welds, weld condition number 20, 8,500 amps. And then the next several welds, weld condition number 12, 7,500 amps. So we need to go through, we need to make sure that we're adjusting that machine for each of those different welds. So again, we're gonna make our first 3 welds at that 9,000 amps, and then our next ones we're gonna make at 8,500 amps, and then the next ones we're gonna make at 7,500 amps. So again, we can't just go there, set the machine, and just weld like we may have in the past. So very important to follow those weld conditions, and again, that's why Honda's requiring the auto set not be used in some of these conditions. They want to make sure that you're following those welding conditions. And then the other thing we really make sure we're doing is making practice welds. We always talk about making practice welds when we're talking about GMA MIG welding, conventional plug welds or open butt joints, and visually inspecting them and destructively testing that. We want to do the exact same thing when we're spot welding. We want to make those exact same weld conditions. We want to use the same parts. We want to use the same thickness, the same everything. We want to make sure those welding conditions are going to mirror what we're doing on the vehicle. So we need to make practice welds at each of those different amperages on this particular part as well. So those welds that we talked about, either condition number 15, 20, and 12, we need to make sure that we're testing that on the same type and thickness of material. And where can we do that? We don't want to just use some coupons that we have laying around. We want to make sure that we're duplicating what we're going to do on the vehicle. And that's very important to make sure that we've got those welding settings properly. So that part that we removed, keep those parts, keep them handy, write on them, take good notes, documentation. This came off of a 2019 Honda Accord rocker panel, and make sure you spell out those welding conditions on there as well, and making sure that we're practicing making those practice welds, and visually inspecting them, and destructively testing them, and making sure that we're maintaining our tips once again. So when we come to that, again, back to making practice welds, same thing with weld bonding. If we're gonna do a weld bonding application, we wanna make sure that we're also making making practice welds, and we're just visually inspecting those and destructively testing those as well. Let's look at another case study real quickly here. So this is from General Motors. This is their steel repairability matrix. You can find this at genuinegmparts.com. If you click on the collision tab at the top, followed by clicking on technical documents, tech info, and then that recommended GM repairability matrix. You can see here that squeeze type resistant spot welding, or RSW, they've got it here, is essentially approved for all types of welding on General Motors vehicles, including laminated steel. And if we go a little bit further into it, we can look at, General Motors has done a great job of outlining different requirements for their different types of steels. And I happen to pull up their ultra high strength steel, dual phase steel here. So again, genuinegmparts.com, collision, technical documents, tech procedures, ultra high strength steel, and it says recommended repairs. Squeeze type resistant spot welding can be used to replace factory spot welds where applicable. So again, they've got a general statement around all their different types of steels, as well as what is and isn't acceptable from a repairability standpoint. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about that meets OEM requirements, or OEM approved, or maybe some other verbiage that you might have heard. What exactly does that mean? So if I'm a spot welding manufacturer that maybe doesn't have the amperage and squeeze force required for the most of it, however, if I look at the GM statement that we just looked at and it says spot welding can be used, does that mean it meets the OEM requirements? Probably not. So I really need to ask deeper questions. So if I've got that person in my facility talking about spot welding and that their equipment is OEM approved or it meets the OEM requirements, do some additional get some additional information, ask for clarification, ask for some documentation for that. Try to find out exactly, what are the amperage options for it? What are the electrical force, tip force? How much tip force can I use on it? What are those weld times? And then certainly buy from a reputable source, making sure that you've got that information. So a lot of welding manufacturers that are out there, whether it's at your state or local trade association conferences, whether it's at national conferences, go and buy from a reputable source, making sure that you've got that if they're saying they're OEM approved, do your research, do your due diligence, and make sure that the equipment that you're buying is going to work for it. So, question that we get very often is, what machine should I buy? That's a question that I can't answer, Kristen can't answer, we at Collision Hub can't answer that. Your business is really the only source for that answer. Look at the vehicles that you're working on. Again, if you're working on a lot of Honda vehicles, you want to make sure that you've got that machine that's going to be capable of welding on those vehicles. If you're interested in joining that Audi network, if you're going to be working on Audi vehicles, make sure that you've got equipment that they have reviewed, that they've gone through, that they've signed off on as being adequate and making sure that it works. Are you interested in joining an OEM network? If you're looking at joining an OEM network, again, do your research and find out exactly what the requirements are for that network. Don't just go buy, the machine that's on sale. You're getting the best deal on necessarily. You need to look at what you're working on. You need to look at exactly the models that you're working on. Same thing with scan tools. I get that question quite often. I can't tell you what scan tool to buy because you need to look at the vehicles you're working on, pull your repair orders, and look through your last couple of years. That's really going to help you identify which machine you're going to be able to, that you're going to want to invest in. And when we start talking about which machine I should buy and meets OEM requirements, again, these aren't recommendations, these are requirements. We want to make sure that we're putting that vehicle back on the road properly so it performs as designed if it's involved in another collision. So these are kind of minimum requirements, I would say. So if we get people all the time saying, well, I'm not interested in joining this particular network. Frankly, that doesn't matter if you're not interested in joining that network. If they have requirements for a particular amperage or squeeze type force, those are the requirements. It doesn't really matter whether you're in that OEM network or not. What's important is that you're meeting their specifications for proper welds. So that's really kind of critical piece of it as well. So again, do a lot of research. Make sure you're following those vehicle maker procedures. Look not only in their general area, but look in the specific procedures that you're going to be welding on, making sure that you've got the tip maintenance required, making sure that your shop has got the adequate power coming into it. These are all pieces that are certainly required. It's your responsibility to make sure that you're making that investment, and that's really the only way that we're going to be able to put the vehicle back on the road and have it perform as designed. So check the OEM information. Stay tuned to Collision Hub for more information. Like I said, we're going to do a lot more programs. We're going to go through the Honda lineup and look through the Honda service information and give you some research and tips and really where to find that information. So stay tuned for that. And until then, happy spot welding.